Hello, English learners. Welcome back to English Pods. I am Leonardo.
Whoa! Good morning, students. And I'm Elizabeth.
Today, we are diving into something a little different, like really different.
Different good or different,
Oh, definitely different good. Today, we are exploring an essential topic for anyone looking to excel in English. All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive. And today we're taking a look into the future.
Into the future, yeah.
We're going to be looking at an excerpt from The World in 2050, a glimpse into the future. And it's got a lot of predictions about all kinds of things, technology, the environment, society, healthcare, the economy, the whole nine yards.
Big topics.
Big topics, big changes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to look at.
Yeah, this excerpt is full of bold predictions, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
So it'd be interesting to just kind of see how these potential changes could, reshape our world.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with tech, because it's a big one, right? Right, it always is.
Yeah.
And this excerpt paints a picture of a world where AI is everywhere, like almost everywhere.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking AI-powered healthcare, transportation, even education. Like, can you imagine, like, having an AI tutor that tailors every lesson to, like, your specific learning style?
That would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, what happens to the role of teachers then.
Oh, that's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, do they become, like, facilitators?
Yeah.
Working with the AI to help guide the students?
Right.
Or do their jobs change entirely?
Wow, yeah. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And it's not just education. I mean, you think about AI and, like, the job market, right?
Right.
They talk about this rise of the gig economy, but with, like, an AI twist.
Okay.
Where people might have multiple jobs, and they're, like, specialized. They're constantly learning new skills as, like, AI takes over more of the routine tasks.
Interesting.
Is that an exciting opportunity, or is that, like, a recipe for burnout? What do you think?
Well, the excerpt suggests that some sectors, like data analysis or, like, software development, we might see more of these, like, specialized project-based roles. So that could mean more flexibility and economy for workers.
Sure.
But then what happens to job security?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and benefits. Like, do we need new social safety nets in a world where full-time employment is less and less common?
Right. Yeah, that's something to consider for sure.
Certainly.
But hold on, because, this excerpt takes us even further to space.
To base.
Yeah, it predicts that humans could be living on Mars or the moon by 2050.
Wow.
Family vacations to the moon. Count me in.
That sounds amazing, but, the excerpt also talks about asteroid mining becoming a reality. So then we have to think about, what does that mean for, like, resource availability and global power dynamics?
Right. Who gets to control those resources? Right.
Exactly. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. You're making me think about, like, the potential downsides now.
Yeah.
It's like every exciting prediction also comes with all these challenges, all these questions, right?
For sure.
Okay. But let's come back down to Earth for a minute.
Back to Earth.
Yeah. Let's talk about biotechnology. They mentioned gene editing, and I'm just curious, like, could we actually see a world without genetic diseases?
Right.
And what if we could, like, extend human lifespans to 120 or even longer?
Wow.
Is that thrilling? Is it unsettling? I don't know. What do you think?
It's definitely fascinating. And, the excerpt even talks about eradicating diseases like certain cancers, HIV, which would be groundbreaking for global health, but then we have these philosophical dilemmas, right?
Right.
Like, what would it mean for society to extend human lifespans so dramatically?
Yeah.
What would that mean for, like, resource allocation?
Wow.
Or even just our understanding of life and death?
Right. Yeah. Those are profound questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We'd have to figure those out.
For sure.
All right. Well, speaking of grappling with big questions,
Right.
let's talk about the planet itself.
Okay. The planet.
Yeah. This excerpt doesn't really sugarcoat the potential impact of climate change.
Yeah.
It paints, like, a pretty stark picture, rising sea levels, extreme weather, major disruptions to ecosystems.
Right.
Not exactly a sunny outlook.
No, definitely not. But I will say it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay.
The excerpt does talk about, like, the potential for renewable energy sources
Oh, what?
like solar and wind, even nuclear fusion, to become dominant by 2050. So, like, imagine a world powered by clean energy.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a pretty compelling vision.
It is. And speaking of visions for the future, they mentioned this idea of a circular economy.
Circular economy, yeah.
Can you, like, break that down a little bit?
Sure.
What is that? It sounds pretty different from our current system.
Right, yeah. So in a circular economy, the goal is to, like, eliminate waste and pollution
Okay.
by designing products that can be reused, repaired, recycled. And think about packaging that biodegrades, electronics that you can easily disassemble and upgrade, materials that are constantly cycling back into the production process. It would require a huge change in how we design and manufacture and consume goods.
That sounds incredibly complex, but also incredibly important, especially with, the projected population growth.
Yeah.
They say we're looking at 9.7 billion people on Earth by 2050.
Wow.
With most of them concentrated in urban areas.
Right.
How do we even sustain that many people without, like, totally depleting our resources?
Right. It's a big question.
Yeah.
And the excerpt talks about sustainable urban planning.
Okay.
And resource management becoming even more important.
Yeah.
So think vertical farming, smart grids, efficient public transportation systems.
Sure.
Just a few examples of innovations that could help us create more sustainable and resilient cities.
All right. So it sounds like we're going to need all the innovation we can get.
For sure.
But let's move on to, like, the societal implications of all this.
Okay, yeah.
One of the biggest questions the excerpt asks is, like, what happens to jobs as automation takes over?
Right.
Are robots going to be our new coworkers?
That's the question.
Yeah. Are we all going to be out of work?
Right. And it's a valid concern,
Yeah.
but the excerpt does say that automation will probably displace a lot of traditional jobs,
Okay.
especially those involving, like, repetitive tasks.
Sure.
But then it points to, like, the potential for new job creation
Okay.
in fields that we can't even imagine yet.
Huh.
So, like, think about the jobs that emerged from the internet, right?
Right. Yeah.
App developers, social media managers, data scientists. Like,
Yeah.
could something similar happen as AI and automation become even more sophisticated?
Look, it's a good point.
Yeah.
But, like, what about the people who are displaced? Can
Yeah.
they adapt? Can they get new skills?
Yeah.
Or are we just going to see a bigger gap
Exactly.
between those who benefit and those who are left behind?
Right. And that's where the excerpt emphasizes this idea of lifelong learning. Imagine a world where education is constantly evolving
Yeah.
to meet the demands of the job market.
Okay.
And people are constantly upgrading their skills. Uh-huh.
And knowledge
Yeah.
throughout their lives.
Okay.
So that would require a pretty big shift in how we think about education.
Right.
Moving away from that, like, traditional model of, like, front-loaded learning
Right. Yeah.
and going to a more, like, dynamic and adaptive approach.
That's a pretty radical idea.
Yeah.
But it makes sense with how fast technology is changing.
Right.
But even if we can adapt our education systems, there's still the question of, like, social equality, right?
Right.
Is technology going to be this force that, like, bridges gaps?
Yeah.
Or is it going to make things worse?
Exactly. And the excerpt seems to say it could go either way.
Right. It's complicated.
It's very complex. Yeah.
So on the one hand, you have, like, technology can provide access to information, to education, to opportunities that weren't there before. Think about, like, online learning reaching people in underserved communities.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Telehealth, providing healthcare in remote areas.
Right. Breaking down those barriers. Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's, like, the potential downside.
Exactly.
Like, could technology actually widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots?
Right. Yeah. So imagine, like, a scenario where wealthy have access to all these advanced medical treatments that, like, extend their lifespans while the poor are just left behind.
Wow.
Or a world where, like, education becomes increasingly personalized and expensive.
Yeah.
So it disadvantages those who can't afford it.
Right. So it sounds like technology itself isn't, like, inherently good or bad.
Yeah.
It's, like, how we use it.
Exactly.
And how we, like, distribute the benefits.
Right. It's all about the choices we make.
Yeah, that determines the impact.
Absolutely.
Okay, that makes sense. So, speaking of big changes, the excerpt also predicts this, like, major shift in global economic power.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it suggests that regions like Africa and Southeast Asia will emerge as, like, major players.
Wow.
And, like, challenge the traditional dominance of the West.
That's a big shift.
It is. What do you think drives that change?
Well, the excerpt points to a few things, like rapid population growth,
Yeah.
technological advancements, and a growing middle class in those regions. So, like, imagine a world where the global south isn't seen as just a source of cheap labor, but as, like, a hub of innovation and economic power.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thought.
It is, yeah.
But then, with economic power often comes political influence.
Right.
So how do you think this shift impacts geopolitics, like the world stage?
Honestly, that's a question that deserves its own deep dive.
Oh, for sure.
But I think it's safe to say that, like, the world order as we know it could be in for a pretty big shakeup.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of shakeups, the excerpt also mentions the potential rise of digital currencies.
Oh, right. Crypto?
Exactly. Like, could crypto actually replace the dollar someday?
That's a thought.
It is.
I guess we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out.
Yeah, for sure.
But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just take a step back.
Okay.
And think about what we've talked about so far.
Yeah, a lot to process.
I know, right?
We've gone from AI tutors to space vacations to a world where money might be completely different.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And we're just getting started.
I know. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's like a good overwhelm.
Right,
like it's expanding my horizons, thinking about possibilities I never even considered.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
This excerpt has opened the doors to a future that's both exciting and daunting.
Yeah.
Full of opportunities and challenges.
For sure.
And as we continue our deep dive, we'll explore some of those potential risks and ethical dilemmas that come with these advancements.
Sounds like we're in for a wild ride.
Definitely.
So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back to continue our exploration of the world in 2050. Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of 2050.
Back to the future.
Back to the future, exactly. So before we went to break, we were talking about these big shifts in global economic power.
Right.
And the rise of digital currencies,
Yeah, crypto taking over.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows?
Right.
But, amidst all this exciting stuff, all these advancements, the excerpts also raises some concerns about the risks and challenges ahead.
Right. It's not all sunshine and roses, right?
Right. Not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah.
So let's dive into the dark side a bit. What are some of those potential risks we might face in 2050?
Okay. Well, one that comes up a lot is cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah, because as we become more reliant on all these interconnected systems, we also become more vulnerable to cyber attacks.
Right. It's like a trade-off.
Yeah. Exactly.
More convenience, more risk.
Right. So imagine hackers crippling critical infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
Disrupting financial markets, stealing sensitive personal data.
It's scary to even think about.
Yeah, it's like a real-life sci-fi movie.
Yeah, but with real consequences.
Exactly. And it's not just external threats, right?
Okay.
We also have to think about these technologies being used for surveillance and control.
Right. By governments, by corporations.
Exactly. Think about facial recognition.
Yeah.
Data mining algorithms.
Right.
All these tools that could be used to erode privacy.
Right. To control people.
Yeah, to control people.
It's a tough balance, right?
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance.
We want all the good stuff technology can do, but we don't want to lose our freedom in the process.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So it seems like those ethical considerations just get more and more complex.
They do.
As technology gets more powerful.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about privacy, right?
Right.
There's also the question of inequality. The excerpt mentions technology could bridge gaps.
Yeah.
But it also says it could make those gaps even wider.
Exactly. Right.
So imagine a world where the wealthy have access to personalized healthcare, genetic enhancements, extended lifespans.
Right.
And the poor are just left behind.
Yeah, it almost sounds dystopian, doesn't it?
It does. It really does.
Like a sci-fi movie where society is divided.
Yeah, based on tech.
Exactly. And that raises all these questions about social justice.
Yeah, about fairness.
About equity, right?
Yeah.
If only the privileged few have access to this technology,
right,
what happens to everyone else?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
So those are some heavy topics.
Yeah, definitely.
But the excerpt also brings up the potential for, geopolitical conflicts over resources.
Right, because as the population grows
Yeah.
and the demand for energy and raw materials increases,
Right.
there's a chance we could see conflict over access to those resources.
Yeah, it's like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it could be.
More people, less stuff, everyone fighting over it.
Right, exactly. And the excerpt mentions competition over rare earth minerals specifically,
Oh, yeah?
which are essential for a lot of high-tech stuff. And then you add climate change into the mix.
Yeah, right. Even more scarcity.
Exactly. So we could see tensions rise over water, arable land,
Wow.
and it's not just physical resources.
Okay. What else?
Data.
Oh, data. Right. Everyone's talking about data.
Yeah, they call it the new oil for a reason.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, because it powers the AI algorithms, the machine learning systems that are transforming our world.
Yeah, data is behind everything now.
It really is. And as the value of data grows, so do the incentives to collect it, control it, monetize it.
Right. So it becomes a source of power.
Yeah, exactly.
For companies, for governments.
For sure.
Wow. So it sounds like the future is this mix of like incredible promise and potential peril.
Yeah, it really does.
It's like we're at a crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And the choices we make now will determine which path we take.
Exactly.
Exciting, but also a little scary.
Absolutely. And I think the excerpt reminds us that the future isn't like predetermined.
Right.
It's shaped by our decisions, the technologies we develop, the values we prioritize.
So we're not just passive passengers.
No.
We're actually shaping the future.
We are.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a call to action, right?
Yeah.
To think critically about these advancements and to work towards a future that's both technologically advanced and socially just...
I like that. Yeah. A future that's like good for everyone, not just a select few.
Right. And speaking of that, the excerpt talks about universal basic income.
Oh, UBI.
As a potential solution as automation takes over jobs.
Right. Because what happens when no one has a job?
Exactly.
How do people survive?
Right. So UBI, the idea is that everyone gets a guaranteed basic income.
Okay.
Regardless of whether they work or not.
Interesting idea.
Yeah, it's a radical proposal.
It is.
But it's gaining traction.
Yeah, I've heard more people talking about it.
Yeah, because it's a way to ensure that, like, everyone has a basic level of security in a world where jobs might be scarce.
Right, that makes sense.
So the excerpt suggests that UBI could really reshape our relationship with work.
Oh, how so?
Well, imagine a world where people are free to pursue their passions and contribute to society in ways that aren't tied to traditional employment.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it's a big shift.
It is, but it also raises a lot of questions, right?
Of course. Like, how would we fund it?
Yeah.
Would it discourage people from working?
Yeah.
What are the long-term consequences?
Yeah, we'd have to think that through very carefully.
Absolutely.
But it's definitely something worth exploring.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
And talk about something a little more, like, personal.
Still personal, okay.
Yeah. The excerpt mentions this potential for technology to, like, blur the lines between our physical and digital selves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like think about brain-computer interfaces, virtual reality, uploading our consciousness to the cloud.
Wow, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is, right? It's like, what does it even mean to be human anymore?
Exactly, and the excerpt says these technologies could completely change
Yeah.
our understanding of what it means to be human.
Okay, so like, practically speaking, what does that look like?
Well, imagine interacting with the digital world using just your thoughts, experiencing life from multiple perspectives, or even like having your consciousness exist independently of your physical body.
Wow.
Yeah, sounds like sci-fi.
It does.
But the excerpt argues that it might not be that far off.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and then we have these huge philosophical questions, right?
Right, like what happens to our sense of self?
Exactly.
If our physical and digital identities merge.
Right, and what does it mean to die?
Wow.
If your consciousness can live on digitally.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it is, and philosophers and ethicists are already thinking about this.
Yeah, they have to.
And it'll become even more urgent as the tech advances.
Right.
And then we have the practical concerns too, right?
Yeah, like privacy.
Privacy, security, control.
Right, if everything's digital.
Who has access to that?
Right, who controls it?
Wow, it's a lot to take in.
It really is.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface here.
I agree, and it's both exciting and unsettling
Yeah, for sure.
to think about the world our kids and grandkids will live in.
Yeah, what are we leaving them?
Exactly.
Okay, well, the future is full of both promise and uncertainty, right?
Absolutely.
As we go forward, we'll explore some of the potential solutions and strategies that might help us navigate all this.
That sounds good.
But for now, let's take a moment, just process all this information.
Yeah.
Think about what it means for us as individuals.
Right.
We'll be back in a few to wrap up our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm still trying to process everything we've talked about, like all these potential futures.
It's a lot, right?
It is. We've gone from AI to space to like completely new economic systems. It's mind-blowing. Yeah, and we talked about the downsides too, the risks like cyber attacks, inequality, and just like the ethical questions of where all this tech is going.
Right. It's a lot to consider, both the good and the bad.
Absolutely. But, through all of that, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that the future isn't set in stone.
I agree. It's easy to feel like things are just happening to us.
Right, like we're just along for the ride.
But we have choices, right? We can shape things.
Exactly, and that brings us back to, like, what kind of future do we want?
Right. Do we want a future where everyone benefits from these advancements?
Yeah, or just a select few.
Do we want a sustainable future? Or are we okay with just, like, continuing down this path of environmental damage?
Those are huge questions, and I don't think there are easy answers.
No, but it's important to talk about them,
Yeah.
right? To think about the ethics of it all.
For sure, and to work towards solutions that are good for everyone.
Exactly. So I think this excerpt has given us a good starting point.
Yeah, it's highlighted the potential, but also the risks.
Right. And it makes us think critically about the kind of world we're creating.
It definitely does.
So as we wrap up, I have one last question for you and for everyone listening. What from this glimpse into 2050 has really stuck with you? Like, what surprised you? What made you hopeful? Maybe even a little worried?
For me, it's the idea of a circular economy. It just seems so different from how we do things now.
Yeah, it's a whole new way of thinking about production and consumption.
Right, and it feels necessary. With a growing population, we have to be smarter about resources.
Yeah, I think for me, it's that potential for technology to be both good and bad.
Right, it's a double-edged sword.
It is. So we have to be careful, make sure we're using it to benefit everyone.
Well said. I think that's a good note to end on. This deep dive has shown us that the future is full of potential.
It is both exciting and maybe a little scary.
But ultimately, it's up to us to decide what that future looks like.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep imagining, because the future is out there waiting to be written, and we're all part of that story. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another journey into the world of knowledge and ideas.